Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show this Monday morning. In his first broadcast interview since entering the race to become PM, the Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, says he has nothing to hide with his tax affairs. He told us he would publish his accounts annually if he becomes Prime Minister. There are now 11 candidates in the race, including the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, who also launches her campaign this morning. Coming up, we'll have that exclusive interview with Mr Zahawi and news of the first televised leadership debate to be hosted by Sky News. It's Monday, the 11th of July. Nadhim Zahawi tells us why he wants to be the next Prime Minister and promises to be completely open about his tax affairs, even though he doesn't know how rich he is.
I am wealthy, you're absolutely right.
Can you tell us how wealthy you are?
Well, I don't think it's right to sort of go into numbers because I will probably get it wrong.
And then there were 11 candidates to succeed Boris Johnson in number 10. And I'll bring you news of Sky News' plans to host the first televised leadership debate.
Protesters in Sri Lanka say they'll occupy the President and Prime Minister's homes until both leaders officially resign.
The extraordinary occupation follows months of protest and economic crisis.
I'm here at Hillingdon Lido in northwest London. With parts of the UK hotter than Hawaii and the heat wave set to continue, the Met Office has issued a heat health warning.
And 7 times a charm, Novak Djokovic reigns supreme at Wimbledon once again. Also coming up on the programme for you this morning, wherever you're watching us around the world, with Boris Johnson's premiership now over, I'm going to be discussing what's next for the UK relationship with Ukraine, with their UK Ambassador, that's Vadim Pristaiko. And I'll be speaking to the prison doctor turned author about his new book, documenting stories of life and death behind bars. Good morning, everybody. The contenders in the race to become PM has now reached double figures. Home Secretary Priti Patel is also expected to declare later on today, which would bring the total to 12. We'll find out the rules and the timetable later on today when they're announced by the 1922 Committee of Backbench MPs, which is in charge of the contest. So far, the big issue is tax, with all of the candidates promising cuts, including the Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, who's given his only broadcast interview to this programme. But he said the country was facing a national emergency, and that would mean many public sector workers don't receive the pay rises that they're hoping for. I began by asking him why he wants to be PM. Hi, it's good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Why do you want to be Prime Minister?
Well, I think this country has given me everything. I have lived the British dream. I came here at the age of 11, couldn't speak a word of English, hid at the back of the class, okay, and of course very quickly learnt to read and speak the language, but actually think in the language, dream in the language. And I want to deliver the opportunity for every child in our country, every family.
You promised when you were Education Secretary that teachers would get a 9% pay rise. That's what you would be hoping for. Will they get their money now you're Chancellor?
So in the manifesto, we made a promise that starting pay for teachers will be £30,000 a year. The 9% begins to deliver that. And then we need another 7% next year to complete that. I pledge that I will do that. That was my submission to the pay review bodies. But I'm asking more senior teachers to take 5% over 2 years. As Chancellor, will look at the pay review bodies from across government and we'll make a decision together. My message to all public sector workers is, look, I feel your pain, but we've got to come together, because if we don't bear down on inflation now, it will hurt us even more in years to come. That's why I think we have to be fair but firm on fiscal discipline and get the headroom so that we can then inject that growth in the economy for SMEs, small businesses, and of course for people in terms of their own taxation.
So junior nurses can expect 9% as well?
Well, I will look at what the pay review bodies will do for nurses and for the rest of the public sector, and I will, with my Cabinet colleagues, make a decision. Again, my message is we have to maintain that discipline and come together in this really difficult time. It is a national emergency, Kay, and if we do this well, we'll come out the other end a lot stronger. If we bear down on inflation and inject that growth into the economy.
What services would you cut to fund tax cuts?
So I just described to you my experience. I was the Secretary of State for Education.
Yeah, I'm asking you about other departments.
So what I will ask every Secretary of State, and the returns should already be in because Boris actually asked all of us to do this. I will go through those returns from each department to see how we can. I managed in education to get close to that number, that the ask of me. Tough, but I could maintain what I needed to do in terms of what I wanted to deliver on skills, schools, family, and of course, the cross-cutting issues like recovery from the pandemic with the National Tutoring Programme, the Send Green Paper,
But the health services, the health departments are not going to be able to cut their budget, are they?
So
They're just
the health department now under Steve Barclay, I can tell you there is none better than Steve Barclay in being able to focus his laser-like focus on looking at where inefficiencies are and making sure he delivers those cost savings that the health department, I'm certain, can do.
So you think there's some flab in the health service budget?
Look, I think it's only right that across government we do this exercise. It's an important exercise. It's only right that we exercise fiscal discipline when it comes to public sector pay. Why? Because if we do that, we can bear down on inflation. That in itself brings down inflation.
So you're saying
right?
20% cut in every department?
Well, that's what I want to make sure we get to. That will give me the headroom to be able to deliver tax cuts, which I want to deliver.
OK. An emergency budget?
I don't think I need an emergency budget. We are in the middle of a leadership campaign. There's a caretaker government at the moment. If things change, and I've discussed this with my Perm Secretary, Tom Scholar, then of course I will take whatever action necessary.
We need to ask you about your investigation into your own tax affairs. What was your reaction when you saw reports that your own tax affairs were being investigated by your own department?
So I was clearly being smeared. I was being told that the Serious Fraud Office, that the National Crime Agency, the HMRC are looking into me. I'm not aware of this. I've always declared my taxes. I paid my taxes in the UK. I will answer any questions HMRC has of me, but I will go further, Kay. I'm going to make a commitment today that if I am Prime Minister, I think the right thing to do is to publish my accounts annually. That's the right thing to do because I think we need to take this issue in many ways off the table. I will publish my accounts annually. That's the right thing to do. I will look at what the options are in terms of backdating or just publishing annually. I think it's right to do it.
What about your tax returns?
That's what I'm talking about. My tax return I will publish annually.
OK. Over the last decade?
Well, if I'm Prime Minister, I will publish them going forward. I don't think being retrospective is right. I was in business before. I came out of that. Of course, I'm now in politics.
Is it true that your family benefits from an offshore trust?
My family does not benefit from an offshore. I don't benefit from an offshore trust, nor does my wife. We don't benefit at all from that. My mother and father live abroad. That's their business. They don't live in the United Kingdom.
Have you ever had non-dom status?
I've never had non-dom status.
Have you ever used an offshore company to avoid tax?
Never have used an offshore company.
Has your family?
My family, my wife has never been non-dom. She's never used offshore status or a company to avoid tax.
Have you told us everything about your business affairs that could potentially impact on your future ability to be Prime Minister?
Yes, I have.
Have you ever used offshore companies or services firms based in tax havens for the purchase of property or properties in the UK?
No, I haven't.
Have you fully declared all of your properties in the MP's register of interests?
Yes, we have.
Did you pay the requisite taxes, including stamp duty, when purchasing properties?
Yes.
You
or your company, once held £20 million of Yugo shares in a Gibraltar-based company. What was the reason for using offshore financial structures like this, if not for the purpose of avoiding tax?
I was not a beneficiary of the Balshore investment that held those shares. And
who was?
My family. It's on public record. My father.
But why would you do that if it wasn't for the purpose of avoiding tax?
Because he lives abroad. He doesn't live in the United Kingdom.
You are a very rich man. How rich are you?
So I've been very lucky. I've self-made. I have done really well by investing in the United Kingdom. And then, of course, my wife now continues to invest in the United Kingdom directly in UK companies, back to Margaret Hodges' question. And we've grown our investment here. That's, I think, a good thing. And it should be celebrated. I am the beneficiary of the British dream, but I am wealthy. You're absolutely right.
Can you tell us how wealthy you are?
Well, I don't think it's right to sort of go into numbers because I will probably get it wrong.
Is that because you're so wealthy?
No, because these things move around.
We've talked about this before, but you did claim for heating the stables where the horses were. You did pay it back. You said it was a mistake, but is that really the point?
It was a mistake because we bought, my wife and I, a cottage with a riding school. There was an electricity meter in the riding school. There was an electricity meter in the cottage. I was told by the then chief whip that you should claim for you're allowed to for your basic running costs. It's the right thing to do, even if you don't think you need it. I put in the claim. Genuine mistake, not realising that actually, although there was 2 meters, it was coming in on a single bill. When it became public, there was full investigation into this by the parliamentary authorities. They could see it was a genuine mistake, and they agreed with me that it was a complete error, mistake, and of course I apologised and repaid it.
Embarrassed?
Of course, deeply embarrassing. But it was a genuine mistake. It's much better to sort of, admit and demonstrate than to do anything else.
Let's talk about the President's Club. It was an event in 2018 in the Dorchester, just up the road here. Waitresses, female staff said that they were groped. You were there. What did you see?
So I was Children and Families Minister, and I was invited because this was a charity that raises over £1 million for children's hospital like Great Ormond Street Hospital. I arrived there and just after 9, it was an all-male black tie do at the Dorchester, and just after 9, young ladies, hostesses, that came round each table, which made me feel incredibly uncomfortable, which is why I left the dinner and went home. And I think in reflection, including the charity itself, those sort of all-male dinners are wrong. And I think actually one of the things that I'm passionate about is that we treat people properly, including people who are there to serve us, whether in government or elsewhere. And I think I've got a strong track record. Whoever I've worked with in government will tell you that I treat people with respect, I treat them properly, I engage with them because we are a team. That is how you deliver great public services, by working as a team.
What would you say to your sons if they were thinking about going to an event like that?
Don't go.
How would you deal with chronic sexual misbehaviour in the party? I
will promise you this, that across government, if I am Prime Minister, I will bring an independent team. They're available in the private sector. They do it all the time in large organisations that will review all of our practices, because a professional HR department in government is really important. And I know the civil service agrees with me on this. It's really important that we sort of restore that faith that everyone in the team, a junior member of staff, a middle-ranking member of staff can always feel that they work in a positive environment. There should be no place for abuse or people feeling threatened or in some way entering an environment that's just not quite safe. That is just unacceptable.
OK. How important is loyalty to you, given your actions with the Prime Minister over the last week?
Very important. And I think I remained loyal till the end. In fact, when I and many other colleagues went to see him on Wednesday night, and I sat with him, I said to him, look, I've known you for 30 years. They're going to try and humiliate you, and I can't bear seeing you being humiliated. I want you to just explain to you what I think is about to happen, and I hope you will consider it and do this with dignity.
Who's your hero?
My heroine is Margaret Thatcher. I'll never forget. We arrived here on these shores in 1978. In 79, of course, she became Prime Minister. My mother saying, a grocer's daughter, my son, has just become a Prime Minister in this great country that has given us a home and has adopted us. You can do anything in this great country. And an immigrant boy from Baghdad who couldn't speak a word of English is now Chancellor of the Exchequer and is having a go at trying to become Prime Minister. This is the greatest country on earth, Kate.
Good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed, Chancellor. Thank you.
Well, you can watch my full interview with the Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, here on Sky News. That's at 9:30, 11:30 and 2:30 this afternoon here on Sky News. An exclusive interview with the Chancellor on his plans and hopes and dreams to become Prime Minister. Tamara standing by in Downing Street for us now. Morning, Tamara. Thoughts?
Morning, Kay. Well, setting out his stall there, Nadhim Zahawi, we can see that tax plans and personal integrity are going to be crucial issues for all the candidates in this contest. And with that in mind, I can bring you news that next Monday on Sky News, we will be hosting the first televised debate of this Conservative leadership contest with the final candidates remaining in it. And it will be a chance for all of them to set out their stall to the wider electorate. Because although the Conservative Party's 1922 committee will be setting out the rules for this contest later today, what we broadly expect is several rounds of voting by MPs on the 11 candidates who've so far announced they want to get into this race. And then the final decision between the final two will go out to Conservative Party members to make the final decision on our next Prime Minister towards the end of next week. So next Monday, hosted by our very own Kay Burley, will be the chance for a wider electorate to see what the remaining candidates have to offer. And when we asked Nadhim Zahawi if he would be willing to take part, this is what he told us.
Mr Hunt and Mr Javid, we're hoping will commit to an on-camera debate with us on Sky. Will you do the same?
I would certainly commit to an on-camera debate.
He would. Jeremy Hunt also said he will be happy to take part, and we hope that all of those remaining in the contest by next Monday will be able to engage in some of all the key issues facing Britain in this leadership contest, and of course for the next Prime Minister in their in tray.
OK, for now, thanks so much, Tamara. Thank you. So next Monday is when that debate will be taking place. Sky News hosting the first live television debate with those vying to be the next leader of the Conservative Party and the country's next Prime Minister. Monday, the 18th of July, I'll be hosting the candidates at the Sky News studios in West London, where the contenders will face questions from a virtual studio audience. The debate will be broadcast live and for free on Sky News Channel 501, across Sky News digital channels, streamed on YouTube, and our simulcast to our IRN commercial radio partners. George Eustace is here with us now, Environment Secretary, of course. I think I'm right in saying you're supporting Grant Shapps?
That's right, yes.
Do you think he would take part in our debate?
I'm sure he would. I mean, as you know, Grant Shapps has never been shy in terms of coming out on the media rounds, often on difficult days. In fact, one of the reasons I'm supporting him is, firstly, I've seen him in Cabinet over the last 2 years, and I think he's shown good judgment. I've often been in COBRA meetings with him, and we've had, for instance, issues around the short straits and transport and getting goods into the country. And I think he's always dealt with what's thrown his way very, very well. But also, he's always been willing to go out and back for government on difficult days when we have those difficult times. I've always done that. He has too. So I'm sure he would take part in that debate, yes.
Why him over others? Because, I mean, it's fair to say he's not a front runner, is he?
Well, look, I've always taken the view in leadership campaigns, and this is the fourth one that I've seen now, that actually what you should do is decide who you think is the best candidate out of the field. And there are many good, talented candidates. They've all got their strengths. But my view is that Grant Shapps is the best man to become our leader and our Prime Minister at this particular point. He's got cabinet experience over several different leaders. He's shown very good judgment, in my view. He's a very good communicator. He did a stint as party chairman, so he's a good campaigner, and we're going to need someone who can campaign as we go into the next general election. So I just think he's got all of the strengths and the experience that we need at this particular time, and that's why I'm backing him.
Who else would you fold in behind?
I'm not getting into that. I generally take the view that I pick the candidate that I think should win, and I give it my all to help them win. If something goes wrong along the way, well, then I'll probably, privately decide what to do at that point. But at the moment, we're talking to lots of people. We're getting lots of interest in his campaign. I think he's only just launched yesterday, but I think he's a very, very strong candidate, and I hope that we can get him through to that final runoff for party members.
Looks like it's already getting ugly.
Well, we tend to get this sort of joshing during any sort of leadership campaign. As I said, the first one I did was when we got David Cameron elected. It was a little bit similar then, He
came through the field, though, didn't he? I mean, he wasn't a front runner.
That's right. He wasn't a front runner, and that's why I don't believe any MP should sit on their hands and wait to see which way the wind's blowing or declare early because they think someone's going to win and they just want to show their support for who they deem to be the probable winner. It's always the right thing to do to make sure that you put your support behind the candidate that you believe in and not be shy of coming out publicly and saying so in the first round. And that's why I'm doing it now for Grant Shapps, because I think he's the best candidate. I'm not going to sit on my hands and say, well, who might win and who might be in the final round and will he get support? I'm going to get out there and help him get that support because I'm confident he's the right person to do it.
Seems a bit unseemly, doesn't it? 12. I mean, 11 so far, probably 12 when Priti Patel maybe throws her hat into the ring later on today. How are you going to whittle it down? Well,
look, it is a very wide field. There's no doubt about that. And the party does have a process for whittling it down. So every candidate will need to get, a small number of MPs to get nominated, and then.
But how many? It used to be 8, I think, wasn't it?
I think
it has been 12.
Well,
could be 30 this time.
Well, no, it will be for the 1922 committee to decide the rules. I suspect that they will keep the numbers for nominations, reasonably low, so that everybody gets a chance.
So
but then
8-ish.
Well, I don't know. I'm not on the 1922 committee. They'll decide. But I would have thought actually.
I read reports in the paper that it could be up to 30. You don't think it'll be that?
I don't think it should be that, because I think actually what everyone deserves is a run at the leadership in the first round. Whether they then have a threshold above which you've got to get in that first round, I think that's a different matter. So we might see several candidates locked out in the first round. And then, of course, the exhaustive ballot process, as it's called, where you just keep eliminating the final runner and their votes get redistributed to the next round, that can be done actually very quickly. You can condense that into a few days if you need to.
But you do need to.
We will need to, because I think it's generally accepted that we should conclude the parliamentary phases of this before summer recess. So that
Which is a week on Wednesday.
Exactly. Over the next couple of weeks, we want to get this concluded. And that can absolutely be done through that exhaustive ballot process. You can hold several ballots in one day if you want to. So the 1922 committee and Sir Graham Brady will obviously be working out what the rules should be. But I absolutely think, yes, it's doable. It's a tight timetable. It means people have a short period of time to make their case. But I'm here today to make that case for Grant Shapps.
OK. It does seem, with all of the runners and riders, that there was an awful lot of pent-up frustration as far as this Prime Minister is concerned, all of these people now wanting his job. Why did you stick by him?
Look, I didn't campaign for Boris Johnson in the last leadership campaign in 2019. I campaigned, as you might remember, for Michael Gove at that time. And I thought I knew all of Boris Johnson's strengths and his weaknesses. And when he offered me a place in his government, I've always thought it's really important that when the party makes a decision on a leader, that you all rally round and you pull back together and you work as a team. And that's what I've done. And so I worked and showed support for the government, the Conservative government, to deliver our agenda. Indeed, that is what every other cabinet minister also did. Yes, all of them would have had some of the differences with the Prime Minister. All of them would have had things they wanted done slightly differently, but we were all working as a team to deliver for that Conservative manifesto.
Sure, but if they hadn't had the nerve, people like Sajid Javid and Rishi Sunak, to break ranks, we would still have the Prime Minister in post.
Well, I think it was coming to a head because almost certainly the party was heading for another confidence vote in the Prime Minister. Probably would have happened this week, and actually probably would have happened even if no one had resigned, and he probably would have lost at that point. So I think it came to a point where cabinet members, even those like me who were loyal to him, even Grant Shapps, who were loyal to the government and wanted us to hold together, we all realised at that point that he just had lost the confidence of the party, and then you couldn't carry on. Prime ministers are not directly elected. It's not a presidential system. They exist and they're there only while they have the support of Parliament in general, and in particular, of course, the vast majority of MPs on their own benches, because Prime Ministers can't get anything done without that. And I think once it was clear that he no longer had that, many cabinet ministers spoke to him or spoke to his team or spoke to the Chief Whip to say, that the time is up, he's going to have to resign. And I'm pleased that's what he did. He reflected on that advice that he had from cabinet ministers and chose to step down on his own terms.
When will we know who the next Prime Minister is?
It will probably be, I would imagine, sometime in September. The 1922 committee and the Conservative Party will obviously need to announce the rules, but there'll be the parliamentary rounds over the next 2 weeks, so we'll be down to probably just 2 candidates by the end of next week. And then those 2 candidates will go out on a series of hustings around the country during August, possibly early September as well. I would imagine at some time, middle of September, perhaps, we'll have a new leader in place.
Yeah, after they've ripped lumps out of each other. Let's see what happens. Good to talk to you.
Well, it's very important that people, we're all colleagues and we're going to have to pull back together and work together.
Exactly,
so it's very important people work sensibly.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. A quick look at what the papers are saying. The Telegraph leading with the breaking news that the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has joined the Conservative leadership battle. The Times says the Home Secretary Priti Patel is about to join in the fight as they canvass the support of the right wing against Rishi Sunak. The Eye leads with a prediction that the final runoff will be between Mr Sunak and one of the other candidates who've declared so far. More talk of smears in the Express with the new Chancellor and leadership contender Nadhim Zahawi claiming he's being smeared over his personal tax affairs. Meanwhile, the Financial Times says that the senior party figures running the election after planning to thin out the field of candidates more quickly by raising the number of MPs they each need to support their nomination. Still to come on the programme, more reaction to the Prime Minister's resignation, speaking to the former head of the Civil Service, Lord Butler, about what Boris Johnson's departure means for those in Whitehall. And with 11 contenders now in the running, I'll be joined by the former Conservative MP Neil Parish to discuss their chances and his controversial departure from the party. And with the government's agenda now at a standstill, I'll be talking to a Redwall mayor about why levelling up should be a priority, whoever the next Prime Minister might be. To Sri Lanka now, where protesters say they'll continue to occupy the residences of the President and the Prime Minister until both men keep their word and leave office. They agreed to resign after thousands of people stormed government buildings in Colombo. Nicole is standing by for us now in Colombo. Hi, Nicole. What's the latest where you are?
Well, we are inside the President's house that was stormed on Saturday, and you can see crowds of people are coming in. It's actually quite orderly, but all over this building, there are thousands of Sri Lankans taking the opportunity to see the real seat of power, because what's happened here over the last couple of days is extraordinary. It could lead to a sort of seismic shift with the Rajapaksa political dynasty out. And that's what all of these people want. That's what they're demanding. They say they've had enough of the severe economic crisis that has gripped this country for the last few months. They blame the Rajapaksas. They say that they spent all the country's money and now Sri Lanka can't afford to import food, fuel or medicine. So ever since those massive demonstrations that we saw on Saturday, people have been coming to the president's house. They've been trying to check out the opulence and the luxury of how the other half have been living while they've been struggling, unable to eat 3 times a day. People are saying that they won't leave, that they will continue this demonstration and occupying the buildings for as long as the President and the Prime Minister remain in power.
OK, thank you. Now, you may have noticed over the weekend, but it's been rather hot and it looks set to continue, with the Met Office and the UK Health Security Agency putting out a level 2 heat health alert warning in parts of the east and the south of the country. Maddie's standing by for us at Lido, or is it a Lido, in northwest London for us this morning. Hi, good morning. Cooling down in the pool already. Lovely.
Morning, Kay. Yes, it is, isn't it? And it is a really scorching start to the week. The temperature is forecast to reach 33 degrees today. That would be the hottest day of the year, but it also would be even hotter here than it is in the Bahamas or the Maldives. So that is lovely if you can cool down at a Lido. But obviously it does make it very hard for people to stay cool, especially at night, and get to sleep. That is why the Met Office has issued this heat health warning. And it is advising people to cover or shade their windows and to check in with vulnerable or elderly people as well. So if you can stay cool and enjoy the heat wave, which is set to last all week, do, but don't forget your sun cream.
OK, for now, thank you. Look at our top stories for you this morning. On The Breakfast Show, Monday morning, Sky News. Speaking exclusively to this programme, the Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, has promised to be completely open about his tax affairs, insisting that he or his wife have never been non-dom and have always paid their taxes that are due in the UK. Foreign Secretary has launched her bid to become the next Prime Minister, vowing to cut taxes from day one. And now 11 candidates in the race to become Conservative leader, with the timetable for the contest due to be announced today by the Backbench 1922 committee. Sky News has announced plans to host the first of the televised leaders' debates next Monday. Returning now to our exclusive interview with the Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi. Mr Zahawi dismissed allegations that he's being investigated by his own department over his tax affairs as a smear. He also told me if he were to become Prime Minister, he would publish his tax records in full each year.
So I was clearly being smeared. I was being told that the Serious Fraud Office, that the National Crime Agency, the HMRC are looking into me. I'm not aware of this. I've always declared my taxes. I paid my taxes in the UK. I will answer any questions HMRC has of me, but I will go further, Kay. I'm going to make a commitment today that if I am Prime Minister, I think the right thing to do is to publish my accounts annually.
And he's subsequently gone further than that to say that if he becomes one of the final 2 in the contest to become Prime Minister, then he will also put forward his accounts to be scrutinised. So let's see what happens as far as that's concerned. Meantime, no secret that Mr Zahawi is a very rich man. But I was interested to know just how rich he is. Here's what he told me.
I've been very lucky. I've self-made. I have done really well by investing in the United Kingdom. And then, of course, my wife now continues to invest in the United Kingdom directly in UK companies, back to Margaret Hodges' question. And we've grown our investment here. That's, I think, a good thing, and it should be celebrated. I am the beneficiary of the British dream, but I am wealthy. You're absolutely right.
Can you tell us how wealthy you are?
Well, I don't think it's right to sort of go into numbers because I will probably get it wrong.
Tamara standing by in Downing Street for us. Morning, Tamara.
Morning, Kay. Well, the candidates all setting out their stalls now, and we can see how tax cuts, or whether or not they will have them, how far they will go, is going to be a crucial issue in this contest, as well as personal integrity, given what happened with Boris Johnson in the final days and weeks. Nadhim Zahawi trying to bust some of the allegations which will likely be levelled at him over his own personal taxes and some of his own personal record, as he is seen as one of the key candidates in this contest. There are now 11 who have declared they want to run. Liz Truss, the latest to throw her hat into the ring last night, the Foreign Secretary, saying she would implement tax cuts, including reversing the rise in national insurance from day one if she becomes Prime Minister. There's also a hell of a lot of mudslinging as well between the different candidates and some really interesting alliances, who is backing who. We'll get tonight the timetable for this contest, and we expect there will be rounds of voting by Conservative MPs to whittle it down to the final two candidates, and they want to do that by next Thursday, which is when MPs go off for their summer recess. So it's going to really be a breakneck pace with potentially rounds of voting every day. And we'll also get the announcement of how many nominations candidates will need in order to join the race, with a feeling among those I've spoken to close to the 1922 committee that they want to make it a relatively high bar. You'll remember in 2019, MPs only needed 8 nominations to run in the contest. This time it's expected to be at least 20, if not a bit higher than that, in order to try and whittle down some of the lesser known candidates who have said they are entering the race. So tonight we'll get the timetable, and over the next 10 days we'll get a clear sense of where this contest is going in terms of the final two who will be voted on by Conservative Party members. And of course our Sky News televised debate next Monday could be a big moment of the contest.
OK, Tamara, thank you. Well, the 1922 Committee of Conservative backbenchers sets the rules of the party and is electing new members today. As we heard, all 18 places on the executive will be up for grabs. Let's just take a look at the timetable of the day for you. The group's executive has 18 members, as I said, with 6 officers, including the chair, which is Graham Brady, Sir Graham Brady. Later tonight, we'll find out who's in and who's out. The new exec will then set out the rules and timetable for the leadership competition. It's likely MPs will whittle the list down to 2 over the next 10 days or so. Members will then vote over the summer before a successor is named, potentially before Parliament returns in early September. Let's get more reaction now to the resignation of the Prime Minister, and indeed what it will mean for civil servants working in Whitehall. Joining us now is the former head of the Home Civil Service, that's Lord Butler. Hello, my Lord. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
How tricky is it for civil servants when we have a sort of caretaker? I'm being told not to call him a caretaker Prime Minister, but that's what he is. Well,
the job of the civil service is to keep the show on the road. And so it's not really very tricky, and it's not a very long period. During the next 10 days it is, while Parliament's sitting and until it's whittled down to the last 2, there shouldn't be any major decisions to be taken, and major decisions shouldn't be taken. And then during the period when the Conservative Party is consulting in the country, then there's really only 2 candidates, and they can be consulted on any major decisions that have to be taken.
What about when we saw ministers dropping like flies last week? Were there enough ministers? 25% had gone from the Prime Minister's government. Not enough to run the country, we were told. No, absolutely not. And so a lot of business couldn't go on. There weren't people to attend parliamentary committees. And so things virtually ground to a stop. But again, there wasn't an awful lot to do. Parliament goes into recess in the summer. And so, you know, you can operate for quite a long time without all the politicians being in place. As far as civil servants are concerned, I don't know if you managed to catch our interview, it'll be online as well, with the present Chancellor. He was saying that he had successfully managed to cut 20% from the budget of the running costs of the Department of Education. He wants to do that across the whole of government in order to have enough money for tax cuts. That would mean job losses for civil servants, surely? Yes, I expect it would. When I was Private Secretary to Margaret Thatcher, the civil service was cut by 100,000. Now, it's not impossible to do that. The question is how it's done, and it ought to be done
with respect and with care for the people who you're employing.
We did hear the Prime Minister talk about the peerless British civil service when he made his speech that we'll call a resignation speech last week. But he once tried to cut, 90-odd thousand jobs in the civil service over the cost of living crisis. How important is it to have a Prime Minister that is duly respectful of the staff around him?
Well, it's very important. I always think of Gerald Ratner, you remember?
I do, very much so.
And you don't give leadership, you don't get loyalty, you don't get results if you don't treat your employees with respect.
When we talk about the civil service, people at home this morning getting ready for work were thinking, what does the civil service actually do? And the answer is, all sorts of things. They don't just work in offices in Whitehall here, do they? They work in prisons, they work all over the place.
Yes, and it's their job to support the government of the day, to support its policies and to carry them out as efficiently as they can.
And they are roles that are non-political? That must
Yes.
be quite tricky on occasion?
Well, of course, I mean, government is about politics, but you mustn't take a partisan view. So what civil servants have to do is to work for the government that the electors produce.
And how difficult is the transition, not only from when you have one Prime Minister of the same colour to another one, whoever the next Conservative Prime Minister will be, but also when you have a complete change of regime?
Well, it can be a bit of a personal trauma.
Yes, I'm sure. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, you get very close to the person you're working with. I got very close to John Major, and then Tony Blair came in. And then you just have to demonstrate that you are going to do your best for the new incumbent as professionally as you can. And you can usually build up confidence about that quite quickly.
This period, you say it is a period of transition, but it's fairly straightforward, you think, as far as the civil servants are concerned. Are you saying that it's just basically a holding pattern, they're marking time? What if the present Prime Minister decides that he does want to push through some major policy, I don't know, on the Northern Ireland Protocol while this process is going through?
Well, it's not a very long time.
About 6 weeks, isn't it? About 6 weeks, maybe?
Well, 6 weeks, but only 10 days, probably, until we're down to the last two candidates. And the Prime Minister shouldn't do that. He'd be advised not to do that.
By whom?
By the head of the civil service, by the cabinet secretary, not least, and ministers would be advised in a similar way by the permanent secretaries in their departments. And I would expect them to comply with that.
And as far as, just before I let you go, because I know you're terribly busy, when we've seen what's been happening in Downing Street over a period of time during lockdown, how much did you feel for those civil servants that were working there at the time?
Oh, I felt for them very acutely. I mean, I think for everybody, the COVID was a very difficult time and they were working extremely hard. But I was also ashamed of some of the behaviour that went on in 10 Downing Street. It shouldn't have happened. I don't believe it would have happened when I was working there because we had such respect for the institution, for the government. We felt privileged to be there and we felt respect for the Prime Ministers whom we served.
And the way Sue Gray was treated?
Well, I think Sue Gray was put in a very difficult position. I don't think, a civil servant can ever really be asked to judge on the behaviour of their boss. And so Sue Gray produced the facts. It wasn't for her to produce a judgment. I think she handled it very well in a very difficult situation.
And if the same situation or a similar situation were to develop again, you don't think that it would be for a civil servant to find themselves in that position? So who should judge on the Prime Minister's behaviour?
It has to be the Cabinet, Parliament and eventually the electorate.
Well, let's see what happens. Good to talk to you, my lord. Thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Let's get more now on the prospects of the 11 Conservative Party leader hopefuls, joined by the former Conservative MP for Tiverton and Honiton. That's Neil Parish. Hello to you, Mr. Parish.
Good morning. Good morning. Nice to come on. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you for joining us. What are your thoughts on the fact that it's a pretty crowded field already?
It is. And of course, it was a fairly bloody end to the Prime Minister. It was necessary. But of course, it's not only about the candidates now bringing the party back together as well. And also making sure, as we're, getting a new leader, that we're still running the country with the cost of living crisis and the situation in Ukraine. So we really need to get on with it. And I think that's why, the rules to bring in 20 at least backers for the first round, then probably 35 after that. I think, whittle down very quickly. You've got some interesting candidates out there because you've got them sort of main runners, if you like Rishi and Savage, perhaps Liz Truss, but you've got people like Penny Mordaunt and also people like Tom Tugendhat and Kemi Badenoch is an interesting sort of very straightforward lady. And then of course you've got Cilla Braverman, who is very much perhaps the champion of some of the big Brexiteers. And of course it's interesting in the party to see, is it Brexit, is it Remain? I think we've got to perhaps get over that and get on with delivering Brexit and running the country. So it's a great challenge for everybody. And in the meantime, I can say this now, I'm not there. We've got to stop really taking chunks out of each other because we've been doing that for too long.
Do you think it's appropriate that the Prime Minister stays on as a caretaker Prime Minister in the interim, or do you think that Dominic Raab should have stepped up?
I think as long as he doesn't try to take, big policy decisions, go, spending commitments and the like, and we can get it done by when members of Parliament came back in September. So you see, 2 weeks' time, Parliament will recess, and there needs to be a government in place, but there will be no, legislation going through Parliament. I think by the time we get back in September, we will need a new elected, by the party Prime Minister. I think it also does need to go to party members, because the trouble is you can have what you call a coronation, like happened with Theresa May, when the parliamentary party decides, the second candidate withdraws, and you have a prime minister immediately. That might be quite, successful in some way for government, but of course the problem is the party is very perhaps divided over the situation with Boris Johnson. They will want now to have their say, and I think it's time, that the country saw, through Hustings and others, the two that come through very strongly. I mean, I personally think Rishi Sunak is a very powerful candidate. I mean, he came onto the select committee that I chaired in 16. I said to my wife, he's a very bright man, he'll go far. Little did I know, for 4 years' time he'd be Chancellor of the Exchequer. But there's a lot of arguing going on at the moment. People, a lot of the Savage, David, and others want to bring in a lot of tax cuts. But of course, we're still borrowing a huge amount of money every month to balance the books. If you're going to make tax cuts, are you going to cut public spending? All sorts of things. I think we have to be quite truthful, the candidates, not only to the party, but to the country, because, with the situation, Boris had many strengths as Prime Minister, but his weakness, dare I say it, was actually coming out with the whole truth. And I think people actually want somebody to step up to the mark and say, this is what a government we want to bring in. This is where you can trust us. And, there will be some tough times because the economy, British people, we can get out of this, but the economy is tough at the moment.
To what extent do you have to accept some responsibility for your indiscretion for his downfall?
What I did, my indiscretions were very wrong, and I decided to resign. Now, what that created was a by-election. I don't think I brought down his downfall. I think what happened was, once a by-election was called, of course, it also was a big run of events where, you had all sorts of things coming out about the situation over Partygate, and then you had your ethics advisor going. All sorts of things happened during the by-election. So in the end, it became very much a referendum over the situation to do with Boris. But then, of course, coupled to that, you have the Pincher episode, which was just a classic Boris, where, first of all, you're supporting the man. He shouldn't have ever been there being Deputy Chief Whip. But, of course, eventually, did he know, didn't he know? And it all got dragged out over a period of another 4 or 5 days. Secretaries of State had to go out and try and defend him, only for Number 10 then to come out, a few hours later and have to admit more and more and more. And, of course, I've said this before, I sat at least 6 times in Committee Room 14 in the past where in bounces Boris and said it'll all be better, Well, of course, it can't be better because bless him, although he's good on a lot of the big issues, and I hope he does get a big role in Ukraine, because I think he's done a particularly good job there. But, he had to go, I'm afraid. And I don't think I brought about his downfall, but it was all...
But you have to... Yeah, I mean, you've obviously lost your position, and that's not great for you or your family, and the embarrassment that was caused. But you have to accept, some responsibility, don't you, for your indiscretions?
I do, and I apologise again for what I did, but I think my what happened to me and what the by-election was sort of part of the process that brought the downfall of the Prime Minister. It didn't actually cause it, and I think I still did the right thing, and I think Christopher Pincher ought to consider his position as well, I'm afraid, because I think if you have done something that's really wrong, I think you have got to face up to your responsibilities and go. I mean, it's been naturally quite traumatic for myself and my family, but I created the mess. I decided to make the right decision, so that's how it stands.
Did you manage to buy your new tractor after all?
Yeah, I'm getting yes, I've got a new tractor, and I'm also sort of building up my farming side of it, because naturally I go back to my roots, which are very deep in farming, but I still have a political brain, you see, so hence I'm on here this morning to perhaps try and give a sort of fairly candid view on where the party is and where all the candidates are.
Well, we loved the opportunity to talk to you. Please come back again, because I'm sure there's an awful lot of more chatting to do between now and when we find out who the next Prime Minister is. Thank you for taking the time to join us this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Boris Johnson's resignation has cast doubt over what aspects of his government's agenda will live on. And now one mayor has called on Conservative MPs vying to be the party's next party leader and Prime Minister to fully commit to levelling up in red wall and left behind areas. Joining us now, Tees Valley Mayor, that's Ben Houchen. Hello to Mr Houchen. Thanks for joining us on the programme. What do you want to hear from these candidates?
Well, this morning I've written to the leadership contenders because we're talking a lot about tax cuts. There's obviously an internal battle within the Conservative Party for the next leader. But what we're not hearing is what they're going to do and whether they're going to recommit to levelling up. That was a key policy of the Boris Johnson government. It's one of the things that led to many people voting Conservative for the first time ever. It obviously started to build what is now that trendy term, the red wall. And I've asked that there are a minimum number of principles that these leadership contenders sign up to make sure that this fantastic policy and something that's actually really needed to bring the rest of the UK together, that they sign up to these minimum number of principles. Actually, like I say, as a minimum, I hope they can go further and develop a very strong levelling up policy. But at the moment, we're not hearing anything from any of the contenders. And I would hope that MPs, before they vote on Wednesday, will be asking these questions, because there are many of those MPs that have their seat because of the levelling up policy that Boris Johnson championed.
Who are you looking at? Who's taking your fancy at the moment?
Well, at the moment, nobody's replied to the letter, and my concern at the minute is making sure that largely the north, but also other parts of left behind areas across the country are fully supported. I think the levelling up agenda is absolutely key to achieving that, and I'll be deciding on who I support depending on the responses and who gives the best responses to develop that policy, and taking, like I say, areas like mine in Teesside who've been left behind for many, many decades. What is a new Prime Minister going to do to be able to support an area like ours, not just Teesside, but across the whole of the north of England? And as I said, when there was this whole debacle going on about whether we should get rid of the Prime Minister Boris Johnson or not, my concern is this agenda could be on the back burner. And like I say, over the last few days, all we've heard about is tax cuts, and they're extremely important. And I'm sure that people will make their mind up about that. But there is much more to running a government than just tax cuts. And I think the levelling up agenda is something that will define the next general election.
I'm guessing you also want the final two candidates to come up to the region and talk to the local people there.
Absolutely. And I agree with many people who've said that what we actually need to make sure is that this isn't just a coronation. What we can't have is a stitch up between the final two candidates, and then the members and the wider country can't see what the two candidates have to offer. And as we did when Boris Johnson was selected as Prime Minister, there should be a number of hustings across the country. People should be able to form their views before deciding on who the new Prime Minister is going to be.
OK, should the new Prime Minister be a northerner?
I'm less concerned about where they're from. I mean, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is not from the north of England, but is arguably one of the biggest champions of the north of England for many, many decades. It depends on the policy of the person. Like I say, that in the letter that I've written, I want to see the contender who is successful commit to keeping a Secretary of State responsible for levelling up. I want to see them commit to more devolution for other parts of England and potentially parts of the UK as well, because it's been hugely successful in places like Teesside. I want more powers to existing mayors. I would say that when I being a mayor in England. I also want the government to commit to really important large infrastructure projects, which I think send a huge statement to communities and the public across the UK, like Northern Powerhouse Rail. I think we need to go further, and we need to get east-west connectivity across the north as being much, much stronger. So there's a huge amount that needs to be done. And I hope that whoever is successful commits to that agenda. That's going to be largely deciding where my support goes, and whether they come from Uxbridge, whether they come from central London, or whether they come from Middlesbrough. It doesn't matter as long as they've got the right policies for the country.
Just before I let you go, we're almost out of time. If Boris Johnson could stand again, would you vote for him?
I'm hugely sad and disappointed that this Prime Minister's going. I've always been a huge supporter. There's no way from getting away from that. I think he's done a huge amount for the north of England. I think he's starting a really interesting agenda. I think he's attracted people to politics and to vote for the Conservatives that would never have considered voting for us before. And it's fair to say that under this Prime Minister, my area that I represent has done extremely well. So it's a sad day when I see this Prime Minister go, and hopefully the next Prime Minister will be able to do as much as they can to fill his boots. And, that's yet to be seen.
OK, great to talk to you. Thanks so much indeed. Thank you. We've been chatting to the Chancellor in an exclusive broadcast interview here on Sky News. You can listen to it in more detail at 9:30 this morning, when we'll run it in full. But the headlines include allegations of his non-dom status. I said to him, have you ever had non-dom status? I've never had non-dom status, he said. Have you ever had offshore companies to avoid tax? I've never used an offshore company to avoid tax. Has your family? I asked him. My family, my wife, has never had non-dom status. Have you told us everything about your business affairs that could potentially impact on your future ability to be Prime Minister? Yes, I have, he said. And he went further than that. He said that if he finds himself in the final two in the contest to be the next Prime Minister, Conservative Prime Minister, then he would publish his accounts showing his tax affairs and implications. He did also, though, tell us that he wasn't sure how rich he was. Not sure how that's going to go down with some of those watching this morning, especially given a cost of living crisis. But there you go. This is Mr. Zahawi arriving at the Treasury on the first morning of his new post. Will he be arriving at number 10 before too long? He and 11 others fancy it. Stay tuned and find out more.